Brothers and sisters, welcome to my podcast. Now, who I am is not important, but what I am might actually interest you, because I'm the one who's going to break the masks which blind you and the chains that bind you. Follow my lamp former thought slaves as I guide you through my underground railroad of free thought. I'm Seraphim, and this is Escape from Sheepleville. I'd like to begin this podcast by thanking everyone for listening. Escape from Sheepleville is a type of podcastial primal scream therapy for a man who's simply tired of constantly facepalming and keeping it all inside of him. I'm not expecting it to make me rich or famous or for the podcast itself to even be very popular for that matter. So you'll probably never know who I really am, other than some guy without a professional studio, with the inescapable hum of his gaming computer and the noisy shuffle of a clueless city's life in the background. Yet, we're going to talk about some shit that's real. Amazing shit that you've never thought about before, and will change the way you look at both yourself and the world. So pretend that background hum is coming from my spaceship, and I'm an interstellar brother, a celestial debugger, fallen upon this world to fix a societal network that crashed after Mother Earth downloaded a virus in her free screensaver. Let's talk frankly about some shit that's going down in the world. Let's see. In the last few weeks, I learned that Apple has single-handedly done more to keep clueless people from sticking their cell phones in their back pockets than all the public service announcements in human history. So it wasn't all the bitches in low-rise jeans, 2 sizes too small, that were constantly losing their cell phones in clubs and bars around the country that motivated the switch. It wasn't the pickpockets and the purse snatchers turned ass grabbers who live by and prey upon the folks willing to put all their personal information into an electronic gadget hanging half-ass out their back pockets while they're trundling down the sidewalk, their arms full of useless shit they bought shopping at Times Square and elsewhere. No, it wasn't the pickpockets and the ass grabbers who motivated the change. No, it was loyal customers sitting their ample asses down on their new iPhone 6s and bending the living shit out of them that prompted the change. That change being primarily psychological. That is, not to stick your damn phone in your back pocket like some clueless rube visiting the big city for the first time. Now, I'm not holding Apple innocent of this design defect. And that is, in my opinion, exactly what it is. Although you could weave out a conspiracy theory that this was all an elaborate ruse to get people to appreciate and accept the idea that we need to put all this electronic shit directly inside us eventually. That way the advertisers and mass marketers of this world can permanently get right up in our asses instead of being told to get bent by our asses, as was clearly demonstrated by the ill-conceived thinness of the iPhone 6. The corpse of Steve Jobs is rolling around in his grave so fucking hard that his turtleneck is hanging off the back of his Korean-made socks. What were those socks called? Saggies, Ballsy Sage, or from balls to BGs or something. There's a YouTube video of it out there somewhere for Steve Jobs fanboys to see. But you'd think that Apple could have made the phone a little bit thicker or the aluminum stronger. Maybe the crash test dummies for the phone testing division were all based upon the average body weight of the people who assembled those phones. I heard they weren't eating very well. That is, unless you count the asphalt that they ate as they plummeted face first into the ground outside the Foxconn factory back in 2010. In case you forgot, that was 18 people who attempted suicide working there, 14 of whom succeeded. Now, it's not many factories who can say with pride that they make their employees sign legally binding agreements and pledges stipulating that they won't kill themselves working there and that their families can't sue the company if any of their loved ones suffer an accidental death or commit a self-inflicted suicide on the job. At first, I wasn't aware that there was any other type of suicide other than the self-inflicted kind, and then I remembered creepy old Dr. Kevorkian and his assisted suicides. So it appears that the fine print over there at Foxconn overlooks assisted suicide, so at least there's still some hope for the families of those who gave up their lives to demonstrate to the world the shitty work conditions of a place that for years has made products for Apple, a company that rivals Exxon in both wealth and prosperity. And yes, I know. Foxconn is the largest employer in China, and also manufactures such notable products which include the BlackBerry, iPad, iPhone, Kindle, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Wii, just to name a few. But aren't they making enough money to buy themselves some social skills on how to treat their workers? And why did they rip their own employees off on their overtime? If you're this profitable, what excuse do you have to treat your own workers like shit? I mean, when the communists investigate and say, what the fuck are you people doing? Shouldn't that at least raise up a couple of red flags? Pardon the pun. As of this podcast, Apple alone is worth more than the entire U.S. stock market was worth back when the original Alien movie was filmed. And yes, that is after being adjusted for inflation. Meanwhile, here at home, Americans shit a brick because their new iPhone 6s got bent while eating at Mickey D's, or because they lost their most recent bathroom selfies due to the latest shitty update. I'm sorry. It's just your friend Seraphim putting things in their proper perspective. Now, speaking of proper perspectives, let's talk about ISIS. ISIS, this group of teenagers and 20-somethings who at the time of this podcast, I understand, are only about 30,000 boneheads strong. ISIS is an acronym for a bunch of socially retarded jihadists who would like nothing more than to drag this world back to the glories of the 13th century. That is, after Genghis Khan had sacked Baghdad and sent the knowledge of the known world plummeting into the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, followed by the floating bodies of the murdered scribes and the scholars who taught such things. Now, history tells us that the rivers ran black with the ink of thousands of scrolls and red with the blood of some of the most learned men earth had ever conceived. And because of the teachings of a science-hating asshole by the name of Al-Ghazali the century before, the people who survived believed the bullshit promoted by clerics and imams that the Islamic world was destroyed by the Mongols as a judgment from God because he hated people who studied science and math. That, you see, was getting into his personal business. The Islamic world has never recovered from this shit. Now, how stupid is ISIS? ISIS is an organization of blockheads, so senselessly stupid that none of them ever fact-check the internet to see what else ISIS means. ISIS, being the acronym of a terrorist jihadist organization, is also the name of an Egyptian goddess who spent a disproportionate amount of time searching for her dead husband's severed dick. Wait, it gets better. So she could plunk it back onto his recently stitched together and temporarily animated zombie-ass corpse and fuck it so she could get pregnant. Let me repeat myself in case you were interrupted when I said it the first time. ISIS, besides being the acronym for a bunch of clueless assholes who erroneously think that this world is only about 6,000 years old and actively preach that there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet, is also the name of a pagan Egyptian goddess who needed herself some zombie dick so she could give birth to the sun god. I'm not making this shit up. Don't believe me. Google is your friend. It is beyond the scope of my understanding why not one of these motherfuckers picked up a cell phone and said, ISIS? ISIS? Where have I heard this shit before? Better check Wikipedia. What the? Oh, shit! No! Not one of them ever did! So for those of you driving or who cannot look this shit up, let me give you the quick lowdown. For about 3,000 years, the faith of the common people of ancient Egypt revolve around something called the Osirian mysteries. Osiris was the god of the dead and both the brother and husband of Isis. He became the god of the dead after his evil brother Set, who lusted after the throne and his own sister as well, killed Osiris and chopped him into little pieces. When Isis, his wife and sister, heard that he had been murdered, she searched for all the pieces and found most of them except for his dick. So she put the chopped up pieces she found all together on a table and embarked upon a search for Osiris' missing dick with the same ferocity that Monty Python's King Arthur searched for the Holy Grail. With her favorite squire clapping coconuts together, she looked high and low, near and far, from the highest stars of the heavens to the deepest depths of the oceans. She even whistled for it, the way that someone might call their missing cocker spaniel. Here, Dick! Here, Dick! Who's a good dick? Who's a good dick? Nothing. Not even dick butt. Yet, she sallied forth and continued her search from the mightiest tree to the lowliest bush, even if that bush was human and occupied by another dick, because people then were as crazy as people now and were into the same weird-ass kinky shit as we are, but there wasn't as much litigation then. Did I mention that Isis was Osiris' sister? Now, depending upon the version, eventually she miraculously found it. Or, if you believe Plutarch's account, never did find it and had to make a golden one, which she then plunked it right in between Osiris' stitched-together remains. And in a move reminiscent of a porn version of the Bride of Frankenstein, used lightning and magic to temporarily bring his dead-eyed ass back to life so she could mount him and fuck his zombie dick. And as a testament to both her magical prowess and insightful incestuousness, she succeeded in getting impregnated by his shriveled zombie ballsack through that planted zombie dick and conceived and bore a son called Horus, who became known as the sun god. For thousands of years, people actually believed this bullshit. Then, as today, there were some who wisely took it as a metaphor, or even saw it as a mythological retelling of some dysfunctional family squabble amongst incestuous royals, thankfully long dead. But there were many, many, many others who believed in it outright. Considering that this story is about how the sun god was conceived from spunk shot out of a corpse, are billions of people believing in a literal virgin birth really any weirder? Let's go back even further to the pre-Christian world. Is it really any more bizarre for people to believe that a couple of their butt-naked ancestors got tricked by a talking snake into eating a piece of fruit off a tree? I mean, what were your choices back then? Believe in the power of a zombie's dick, or in a god who's kind of a dick, because he stuck a tree in the middle of a garden with a big-ass neon sign that said, "Danger! Don't eat me! Because if you do, I'll make you smart." Now, some of you are probably pissed off at me because I said that I thought that the God of the Old Testament part of the Bible was kind of a dick. Well, I do think he was kind of a dick. He was such a dick that he made the Hebrews cut off the foreskins of their own dicks as a sign of how much they were committed to his all-powerful dickishness.
"Hey, Moses, do you love me?"
"Yes, Lord, of course."
"Enough to cut part of your dick off for me?"
Moses is like, "Say what?" But despite this, the Hebrew faith was way better than the other religious options for centuries. For example, much like the last two popes before the current one, the gods of the ancient world had nothing to say about pedophilia. Try being a little boy in ancient Greece and consider that the options available to you are 1. either shacking up with a pederast because your parents are too broke to pay actual money for your education, or 2, hanging out with the local Hebrews who love math and who absolutely will not molest you, but to join their social club, you have to let them cut off the tip of your dick. Decisions, decisions, decisions. Fact is, the ancient world sucked ass. And any organization or so-called religious movement that wants to turn back the hands of time or stifle scientific discovery, especially under the threat of violence or force, sucks ass as well. Maybe ISIS is an appropriate name for these guys. I mean, they are trying to gather up the fragments of a society chopped into pieces by Genghis Khan, and they're trying to find a bunch of zombie-brained dicks willing to fuck under the Islamic world right back into the dark ages of the 13th century. I can recall only one other time that I've seen such a stupid choice of a word to represent what someone stood for, and that has got to be the infamous Lilith Fair. Some of you may not have heard of the Lilith Fair. The Lilith Fair was a concert tour and traveling music festival founded by Canadian musician Sarah McLachlan, network music groups Dan Fraser, Terry McBride, and New York talent agent Marty Diamond. It took place during the summers of 1997 to 1999 and was revived in the summer of 2010. It consisted solely of female solo artists and female-led bands. In its initial 3 years, it was said that the Lilith Fair raised over $10 million for women's charities throughout North America. Cool, right? A few years ago, in 2010, the Lilith Fair staged a revival with mixed results as several dates were canceled and many performers backed out of scheduled performances. In March 2011, co-founder Sarah McLachlan declared that the Lilith concept was no longer being considered for future shows due to changing audience views and expectations. Indeed. Let me share with you what a name can do when the general public has now got access to the internet and can do the research that probably should have been done prior to McLachlan naming the concept after Lilith in the first place. The least of the reasons being that the name Lilith is translated as night creature, night monster, night hag, or screech owl. The name Lilith is from the medieval Jewish legend that Lilith was Adam's first wife. In Jewish folklore, from the 8th through the 10th century alphabet of Bin Sirah onwards, Lilith becomes Adam's first wife, who was created at the same time and from the same earth as Adam. This contrasts with Eve, who was created from one of Adam's ribs. The legend was greatly developed during the Middle Ages from there. In the 13th century writings of Rabbi Isaac ben Jacob HaKohen, Lilith left Adam after she refused to become subservient to him, and then would not return to the Garden of Eden after she coupled with the archangel Samael. Now, before this podcast turns into a theological class on Jewish mythology, let me cut to the chase. In the story that McLachlan heard, Lilith was just pissed off that Adam wanted her on the bottom when he was fucking her. She wanted to know why she wasn't on the top doing the pumping. This tells me that Adam was pretty clueless, because any guy who's had his share of being on top all the time should be more than happy to lay on his back and let his girl ride the pony. So naturally, she got pissed. But instead of getting counseling and trying to work it out, even though God was on humanity's speed dial at that time, she still got up and left him and the garden and hooked up with the archangel Samael and fucked him. It gets worse. Not content with archangel dick, which is probably too feathery anyway, she decided to try the animals she bumped into. Groundhogs, rhinos, horses, donkeys, elephants, giraffes, chimpanzees, and baboons, and for all we know, Alvin and the Chipmunks and Timon and Pumbaa could have gangbanged her as well. Look, folks, a myth is a myth whether it's a porn version of the Lion King or the story of creation as expressed in Jewish folklore. So God gets pissed off at this shit. And since Lilith by now is cray-cray anyway, she actually tries to trick bag God on a technicality that since she never actually ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, she can't really be held responsible for her actions. And then, in front of the living God, she turned her ass and started twerking just like Miley Cyrus did to Robin Thicke. Now, despite how good your ass looks, it's never a good idea to bring to God's mind just how fucked up the world will be thousands of years into the future, much less to remind him that throwing Adam out of the Garden of Eden will eventually result in Robin Thicke being born. So God, facepalmed, waved his hand and turned her into a demon. Now at first, she's thinking this is some kind of a reward for telling off God and proving her point. And she's really digging the wings and the ability to fly. That is, until she finally lands, looks down, and sees that God has given her feet like a chicken. At this point, she sees that she's been duped. And she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. In fact, this was not a good thing for her because the most important thing in the world to Lilith was her shoe collection. She begged God to turn her back because, and we can only speculate here, that it was because the ancient world's version of Jimmy Choo and Louis Vuitton had teamed up for a pre-Diluvian shoe sale. God said, no way. Fucking animals is gross. Even Satan knows that, and he's still traumatized from stumbling upon your last adventures. So, still full of herself, and ignoring what the Lord had just said, she threatens to join forces with the devil if God doesn't change his mind. Then, in front of the host of heaven, she immediately tries to put the moves on Satan, and he pushes her away, marches straight towards the throne, and says, "Hast thou made this woman to torment me? Are not the fires of hell sufficient for thy wrath? What have I done to thee, that thou wouldst create such an insufferable helpmate that even the grave doth now reject?" The devil himself, the greatest pimp the world has ever seen, shot this bitch down. So in anger, as she's storming out, she tells the devil that she can do a better job than him anyway, curses God, and then tells him that she'll murder the children of men in their sleep until he changes her back. Now I can only imagine the looks that both God and Satan shared together at that moment of time. In fact, taking the rib out of Adam was the devil's sincere suggestion at that time, so that they both wouldn't have another Lilith problem. So let's wrap this up. The mascot for the Lilith Fair is a person who left her husband because she wanted to get on top and he was too stupid to appreciate it. That I can understand. She then, despite being Adam's only wife, went and fucked the archangel Samael. I've got no judgment there also. Look, I don't want to be a hypocrite here. So let me readily admit that even if I was married to a woman made by the hands of God himself, I imagine that if some gorgeous winged angel, who looked like she was created by an artist from deviant art, if such an angel glided up to me and said that she wanted to make a baby, by the time I was done, my dick would request his own hospital room and wouldn't speak to me or reply to my texts for a week. My problem is that whole donkey show shit she did. And it goes without saying that suffocating children while they're sleeping is just fucked up beyond redemption. So, if you're a woman trying to raise money for legitimate women's causes, you legitimately believe in artistic and sexual freedom, and you strongly believe in freedom of choice when it comes to your own bodies, especially pertaining to your right to have an abortion, does it make sense to name your fairs and concerts after a woman who fucked animals so much that God himself got pissed off enough to turn her into a demon, and her response was to creep into other people's houses and murder their children while they slept. These things matter. Now, granted, we have control over some words, and we can take control of them and own them, but context is extremely important. Dan, Terry, Marty, what the fuck were you guys doing? Did you guys do any research at all? Or were all three of you just thinking that you'd piss off the Bible thumpers and that the free publicity would push the fair along in perpetuity? There had to be someone, an unsung hero of the male persuasion, with both the courage and the tenacity to rise above his pussy-whipped peers and face these troll women head on and show them the lemming cliff that they were going to march headfirst over. But I guarantee you, none of them listen. Headstrong women never do, unless you fuck the living shit out of them and catch them right before the moment that they fall asleep on your ass. To a woman, a man's logic is only readily accepted without resistance within that brief window of opportunity between the aftermath of a sublime orgasm and the time it takes for her to pass out as a result of it. Oh, and you better be cuddling with her too. If she's a narcissist or a sociopath, phrase it in the form of a question so she thinks that it's her own fucking idea. Word to the wise. Crazy women and women in love with themselves can only respect the men who can control them within the parameters of their own crazy terms, or who can play the role of a father figure who fucks them senseless and slaps the living shit out of them when they get out of line, i.e., a fucking pimp. Now, you can pull the rug out from under bitches like this and have a relationship with them that might last a couple years, but the game rules always revert back to shit tests and uncontrollable behavior, unless you act like a pimp. Now, I know that eventually there's going to be some women trolls hyperventilating over this shit, but I assure you that it's going to get much worse in a moment. Let's dig deeper, gentlemen, shall we? Earlier this month, yet another high school sex scandal broke out. This time with not one, but two crazy bitches having sex with the same 16-year-old student at the same time and filming their romp. Quite literally a menage a trois. Now, normally, I just shrug at these things and then facepalm at everyone's self-righteous reactions to what was quite literally my personal fantasy growing up. Albeit one which, admittedly, I didn't have the balls to follow through on. I mean, I was only 13 for crying out loud. It is my sincere belief that the vast majority of we males have had a sexual fantasy about at least one of our teachers during the formative years of our youth. These young men shouldn't be told that they are victims. They should be heralded as all-American heroes. Does anyone here remember Deborah LaFave back in 2004? She was a smoking hot 23-year-old blonde, and she got together with a 14-year-old male student. Google this woman right now if you're not driving, and you can do it safely. It's Deborah LaFave. That's Lafave. I'll wait a second here. Some of you have found it already. Take a look at her. What the fuck, right? I mean, look at her. Now, back then, people were up in arms over this shit. Nancy Grace had just received her own show and was frothing like a crazed jackal. And as the drama progressed throughout the many months of litigation, a moment in world history which could have been emblazoned in stone occurred. Someone on Fox News actually interviewed the boy's father and asked him how he felt about Deborah LaFave's lenient sentencing. Allow me to quote this shit. The father said, and I quote, "I think she should have gone to jail. I've stuck by that all along. It's a horrible, ugly thing that she's done. We're very upset. I don't feel there were enough consequences of actions. Hopefully, all involved are conscious of the pain our son and family has endured." End of quote. Now, when I first heard this, my jaw hit the ground. And I said, "What?" In my opinion, the only real pain that this man has had to endure was realizing that his son was a better player at 14 than he could ever be. This man had a chance to make world history, and he walked away from it. Listen to me. Teachers this smoking hot, letting some kid whose balls just dropped go balls deep inside them, just doesn't happen every day, you know. Now, had I been that boy's father, before this shit even went to court, the moment some asshole with a microphone from a news channel had stuck it in my face and asked me how I felt about this woman molesting my son, I'd have snatched that goddamn mic right out of his hand, looked at the camera and said, "My son is my hero." And I want to say to every man everywhere in this world that he should be your hero too. It is both sanctimonious and emotionally destructive to my son for any of you to make the laughable claim that he is some kind of a victim when he clearly had the time of his life. Now is not the time to confuse him, but to reassure him. To impress upon him the unassailable truth that the best part of us wish we could have been in his shoes. The vast majority of us can still remember that one teacher we had back in high school who we would have bent over her own desk had we had the chance. But we either didn't have the guts or we lacked the opportunity. My son had both. Instead of castigating this beautiful woman and treating my son like a victim, we should be cheering him and heralding his accomplishment as the living embodiment of all our hopes and dreams during our own teenage years of blue balls and unrequited love. If this nation had any common sense, it would petition the United States Congress to order a sculptor to carve my son's face on Mount Rushmore, right beneath Teddy Roosevelt, the greatest Rough Rider of them all. So that thousands of years from now, in our post-apocalyptic future, when most of humanity has been either reduced to ashes or forced to fight mutants and cannibals just to survive, that one of them, just one of them, might see my son's face and read the plaque beneath it and be encouraged to know that there was once a time in our history where we didn't act like a bunch of pussy-whipped hypocrites. I'm buying my son a Mustang. And at that, I'd have held up my outstretched arm and dropped that reporter's mic on the sidewalk like the champion of an epic rap battle and of thinking men everywhere. And with that thought, it's time for me to bounce. Thank you for listening. Yo, this is Seraphim. I'd like to thank you for listening to my podcast. If you like what you've listened to so far, please subscribe, rate it, and maybe let your voice be heard by saying what you think about it and spreading the word. In the meantime, I'll be out here in the shadows, trying to change the world one twisted podcast and one catastrophic mindfuck at a time. I hope we meet again. Peace.